Okay. Hello. I'm kidding. Good evening, listeners. Welcome to the Gray Area Podcast. I'm W, and with me tonight is C and J. C and J, say hi.
Hi.
Hey, yo, guys.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. I'm so sorry. We're just having some technical difficulties tonight. Anyways, I hope everyone's well. Hope everyone's enjoying their long weekends, especially if you're the type of person who's working from home. Hello. Tomorrow's going to be a Monday, so thank you for spending your Sunday night with us. Okay, cool. So, for tonight, listeners, we will be talking about mental health. Ooh. Jay,
Taboo.
do you have like ominous music around that we can like play?
I can try. Dun
Maybe
dun dun.
All right.
Okay, guys.
Whew. Okay.
We're such nerds, dude.
I know. I know. Going back though, tonight we'll be talking about mental health, specifically how mental health is being addressed or is being responded by the generation gap, aka the boomers. Boomers.
Oh,
Dun dun
isn't that offensive?
dun.
Okay. So, quick disclaimer for everyone: everything that we say in this podcast is totally our opinion only. Nothing that we say here is actual truth or could be taken as something that's hopefully truth. So, and yeah, it's all of the things that we say are about our opinions. Apart from that, if you might have an opinion, please don't be afraid to share it with us in the chat. We would love to know what are your thoughts in the things that we talk about, and we want to be able to engage with you and actually also know what are your thinking processes uh, in the topics that we talk about. Okay, cool. So once again, tonight we'll be talking about mental health. C and J, are you well familiar with mental health?
I
Well,
would like to say so.
How so? I'm kidding.
No, a few experiences here and there, and it's something I'm passionate about. So,
When you say passionate about it, is it almost something like an advocacy of yours when it comes to mental health?
mm, could be, but I feel like I'm still not ready for it to be my advocacy. But for now, my goal is just to never invalidate someone's feelings. So I think that's my level of passion in this topic.
Yeah, I actually agree.
uh,
You know, we live in a world right now that's very well aware already on mental well-being, right? So this is what we call like mental health and the things that we know about, right? We're very much aware of it. We very much know how important it is in our generation. But the question now is the question for tonight, just to start things off with our discussion. Do you think mental health is something that everyone talks about? When I mean everyone, is it something like, is it only just us millennials or Zoomers, or is it also talked about by the boomers and the older? Who wants to start? Jay?
okay. On my personal experience, I honestly don't think that mental health is talked about as much by previous generations. I think it's more emphasized in our current generation as millennials, Gen Z, stuff like that. But for the previous generation, I think it's more dismissible. Um, I guess it's just that generational difference. I mean, one simple example is that, for example, like you're feeling down because, let's say, um, you see a love interest not respond or stuff like that through chat, or and then your parents or your mom would get that vibe from you, and then they would just brush it off. It's like sa computer and anime, or sa sige ra mo gud kag cellphone, or stuff like that. So that's one simple example of how the gen gap affects that thinking for mental health. I mean, they're more dismissive of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. So yeah. So basically, from what I could gather, or actually, I agree with you, Jay.
Yeah.
When it comes to like older generations being very much dismissive when it comes to mental health, especially like for example, when you're like maybe you just have like a very long day, or maybe you're just like mentally drained, and somehow it's somehow convoluted into something that's uh because of your computer or because of your mobile phone or the radiation in your devices or
Yeah.
Mm,
right,
yeah.
Or
right.
the type of food you're eating.
Yeah. And I think the worst part really is being told that it's just all in your head.
Yeah.
You feel kind of invalidated, but yeah, yeah. These types of conversations, it doesn't really exist in the dialogue when it comes to like older generations. If based on observation alone. How about you, C? Do you have any opinions about it? Do you think it's also being talked about by everyone, or do you think this is more of like a millennial thing or like a young topic when we're talking about it?
I think this topic is more famous in our generation or the younger generations, but I still think that it's also being talked about by older generations. Because in my experience, for the thesis we've done for it's about mental health, and we've
Ooh.
talked to the people we've interviewed were actually from older generations, the psychologists, the DOH personnel, and it's pretty evident that they care for other people's mental health, mental being also. So I don't think it's not being talked by older generations. I just think that it's not being talked a lot, and maybe it all the culture we have, the Asian culture, also contributes to that because Asians don't really share much when it
I
Yeah,
comes
cannot
to their
agree with that.
feelings.
that's
So yeah, I think that's it. And the reason it's famous or it's uh talked very much talked about topic in younger generations is because of the internet. Yeah, we are most likely aware of it already.
correct. Right. We're very much aware about it. We very much talk about it. We actually very much constantly. Um, if we notice most of the time, there are a lot of drives or a lot of initiatives online when people just like say or at least tell you or share with you the importance of mental health. But you were able to mention earlier, C, right? Uh, that yes, it's being talked about by the older generations, but it's not being talked a lot. And the first thing that really popped into my mind was when we say mental health, or the first thing, or we call it a stereotype if you must. When it comes to mental health and older generations, it's usually bordering the extremes. If you guys agree with me, what I mean by
Yeah.
extremes, it's like when you talk about mental health, it's something that you get sent to an asylum to, or to like a hospital to
You
like
get
have like talk,
Yeah,
institutionalized.
right?
Yeah.
yeah,
So
very true.
yeah, so this leads us to actually our second question for tonight, right? Based on our opinions, what do we think older generations think of mental health? Do is it really mostly in the extremities, or is it something that they just think that doesn't necessarily exist? So that's something you could just uh, uh, what do you call that? Work yourself on and just like remove yourself or ignore it until it no longer exists. So
Hmm.
what do you think older generations think about mental health?
Um, I can start, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
go ahead.
Okay.
No problem.
Sure. Based on what I've noticed, like from my mother or father, my grandfather and grandmother, um, what they usually do with if it's a long day or they're having problems, they normally keep to themselves. I'm I think it's because our generation shares a lot because we have the internet
Mm-hmm.
exposed to all of this media. At their time, people were more enclosed or personal or kept to themselves or their family. Um, Another thing is maybe it's how they experience growth because, for example, my grandfather, um, he hasn't had the easiest life. I mean, when he was young, he would have to sail from Cebu to Bantayan, carrying stuff like salt, coal, and other things. So he became a very stern person. He didn't want to share his feelings as much. He didn't want to convey things to his wife, to his children. He was more of a provider, not someone that you would attach emotionally with. So that thing could be so a thing that contributes to that difference in thinking in terms of mental health. I
Right.
mean, you can try like try probing into your mom or your father, see if like they can open up to you. Maybe with younger people it's easier, but I've noticed with my grandfather I really can't connect with them that much
Right.
in an emotion.
Mm,
Yeah.
It's oh yeah. Actually, some personal experiences really affect how you deal when it comes to like trauma and how you deal with certain things, most especially mental health, right? I actually thought of like a really good question earlier when you were like, talking about it. And I think it's a question that uh if you put yourself in the perspective of an older folk or an older person, it would make sense. Let's say, for example, of course, mental health existed prior, right? Years prior,
Yeah.
even way before. So, what makes millennials special, or what would, or is there something wrong with just telling millennials to just get over it, since it has worked for the older
For
generation
them. Yeah.
years prior, right? Right? Or why why is there such disparity when it comes to how we deal with mental health right now compared to how our parents or grandparents deal with mental health? Do you think, well, on your own personal opinion, do you think that how we handle it right now is something much better compared to our older generations, or is it certainly lacking, or should we just go back to how we used to deal with it, which is just get over it? um See, maybe you want to share your opinion on my question, or
mm, yeah, sure. Uh, I think it's worked with the older generations or older people to not share their feelings and still keep their minds intact, still keep that sanity. Um, and why it doesn't
right,
apply to our generation right now is I think the way of living before and the way of living now is, let's admit it, it's really not the same. We know that we live easily than they did before, right? Do you guys agree with me?
Yeah.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
different
So
hardships, I think.
yeah, I think that when so right now we live easier lives compared to them. So when something hard or hardships come in our way, or something that we haven't experienced before suddenly comes our way, we suddenly feel like we can't handle it. Whereas when they were growing up or when they were having a journey in their lives, they've constantly experienced that hardship, so that whenever they face that hardship, they know how to deal with it. Uh, am I making sense here? It's kind of different because they've always experienced it, whereas us younger generations haven't always been that resilient to these emotional challenges.
Right.
Uh,
But the question there though is, should we be more emotionally resilient? And if in that, I mean, sorry, if that's the case, for everyone who's listening, I'm actually really for mental health, right? But just to steer up the conversation here, or at least trying to understand how older generations think. Um, if we're talking about like emotional resiliency, do you think just getting over mental health should be something advocated for since it actually builds resiliency in a certain person, or overall is this actually detrimental to how we deal with things most, or how our behavior is actually affected, right?
Mm. I
What do
think
you
mm,
guys?
it's
hmm.
I think it's sort of like a different set of problems. Our generation is more exposed to social media, envy, um, emotions such as greed, wanderlust, romanticization of mental health or mental illnesses. So we have more exposure to things that resiliency in itself can't answer, because normally resiliency would work if you're like in a family setting, but being constantly bombarded by it every day of your waking life, especially if you're on the internet, especially if you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, it creates this environment in which, because you're it's an environment that encourages sharing, and then you're feeling depressed or you're feeling down and you can't share these things, it eventually you'll have to implode. And some people can't take take that. I mean, that's why mental when you have a problem or you're undergoing an issue with, or like depression, one of the first things that a psychologist would tell you is to get off the internet or remove yourself from social media or stuff like that. So that's a general like that solution to get off the internet and stuff like that. But
Mm,
the older generation didn't have that type of problem, so they could just keep it in and it wouldn't be a problem for them, because if they were growing up in a time wherein the problems were different, it's not about your status or it's not about how you look on the internet. It's more about surviving day to day, or how your government treats you, or world scale wars and stuff like that. So their generation was quite different. And maybe at that time, resiliency would work because you knew your family would be there for you. But the family unit is different now. So a whole host of factors have changed since then. So I don't think resiliency is enough. And I think mental health would be better treated in other ways than resiliency.
mm,
I agree. Right. We do live in very different times. As you
Yeah.
said, right? Older folks lived in times where there hasn't been a lot of connectivity, not a lot of socializing. I think that's one
Yeah.
of the key things that we haven't really we haven't brought up yet, or actually that you were able to brought up earlier. That currently in our generation, we live in an age where everything or everyone can actually see each of your moves or each move you make, and sometimes uh judgment is there in every step that you take, right? So I think
Mm.
people these days really have to be like extra careful what to post online. And there are even some people who you don't necessarily who also have so much hate for something that you think is totally normal. And I
Yeah.
think when we talk about resiliency, uh, or well, for me, why resiliency works so good for for older folks is that they could actually just ignore all of those things before it. Everyone
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
interacted prior was either their close friends, their family members, and that's it. No one else. But us, we're in our generation, we're interacting with the world. We we basically interact with everyone who's in the internet at the same time, right? When we post when we post a video on our social media, or when we comment on pages, or when even when we're doing our podcast right now, we're
Yeah.
actually interacting with the world. And I think it's something that's really different between older folks as well as uh, the younger generation. Speaking of different things, I think you were also able to mention earlier the romanticization of mental health. Um, it's also pretty evident on how older generations think about mental health in the type of media that they portray, or the type of art forms um, that they showcase uh, when it comes to the world. Am I correct? So, when we mean by romanticization of mental health, this is really more of like an yung mga those types of shows, right? That uses, for example, amnesia as like a main plot point, or something that will just like wipe the slate clean. What do you guys think about this? Do you think this is actually detrimental to the cause, or is it something that's actually becoming more prevalent right now, or
Mm.
what do you think should we do about it?
Um, I think it's nice for people to be aware of the mental illnesses that there are in the world, but I
True.
also think that exaggerating those kinds of illnesses and making them a plot point, only a plot point. Like, let's say this character has been doing a lot of shitty stuff from beginning till end, and then they're just gonna say it's because of this, because of that, because he had this certain type of illness, and it kind of paints a bad picture to those who are experiencing those. Because um, being letting people be aware of that illness is different from making it something, no, romanticizing it. I think it's very different because people then will think, no, it's so sad that they think this way. That's it kind of justifies all their shitty acts when it really shouldn't be, because they still should be held accountable for everything they did, but they should be understood, not that we just ignore all those bad things he or she did because he has that certain type of illness. I
Right.
think that's what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
There's well, I agree. There's actually like there's a misrepresentation of mental illnesses when it comes to how it's portrayed in traditional media. To be honest, it's kind of very much dumbed down in a
Mm,
sense, right?
yeah.
I mean, how many? I could think of like how many TV shows do we have in the Philippines now? Let's say for example, this person was actually a really bad person, but then again, he was actually just going. He actually just had like a mental illness, or let's say for example, somehow. Well, I think the best example really here is amnesia. How amnesia is really like a plot point in certain things. How people just suddenly, drives like a romantic undertone when you have like specific when you have amnesia, or how um couples find it like a second, what do you call that, another uh
Chance
lease of life,
or something.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Another lease of life, and like jump starting the relationship when there's like amnesia. What are your thoughts, Times? Do you
Mm.
these types of,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not really in favor about how mental health is being portrayed in modern media. I mean, ever since forever, mental health has already been portrayed in books, literature, and stuff like that. And I think since the start of the romantic movement, like how people began to think of true love or emotions in a deeper level, people have been trying to glorify or dumb down like the gravity of mental illnesses. Like for our viewers out there who are listening to us, you can try to search for a painting. It's called The Death of Chatterton. It's one of the first paintings wherein it's romanticizing mental health in a kind of wrong way. So if you look that up, it's a poet that who committed suicide because people wouldn't publish his work. So because of this painting, it became a pop culture notion that people that do this are tragic heroes. So it it's kind of wrong when you think about it, right? Like
Mm.
when someone who's struggling with depression commits suicide because he failed at something or she failed at something, and then it's glorified. it's it's supposed to be somber or looked at, and maybe we can do something else about this, or maybe we can address how to solve issues like depression. But instead, what the media is focusing, or what like shows like 13 Reasons Why or this painting that I pointed out, is that the act of offing yourself or killing yourself because something had happened or an event had happened is more of a plot point. So this person, he offed himself, he became glorified, well known. Now I'm talking about the painting. So instead of focusing on why he was depressed or why he was feeling this way, which what he was feeling this way because his family did not acknowledge his poetry and wanted him to be a lawyer. But people don't talk about that. They talk about the act, him offing himself, or they talk about people doing horrible things because they were not well in the head at that time. So I think the media is doing well to make people aware, but not aware on the right things. Like it's more on what people uh, uh, under mental illness do than how can we address it so that they don't experience this. So I
Mm.
think it they provide a focus or make us more aware, but they don't provide any answers or any point of discussion for further than he killed himself because of this, and it's so dramatic.
right? So basically, what these folks do, or what um how people acted before when it comes to, for example, something as tragic as offing yourself, or suicide even. Sorry, for people who are out there, these are very sensitive topics. We would understand if you
True.
would not be
Mm,
comfortable with talking about this,
mm.
but again, this is a safe space. Um, However, yeah, people really treated suicide as something, either something as tragically beautiful in a sense, uh, or something that's, as you mentioned, really romanticized, or something like that, or just to put it simply, na lang, people really focus so much on the outcome rather than
And the
why it
cause.
happened, or what was the
Mm.
cause of why it happened. And I think this is one of the reasons why older generations doesn't necessarily carry a good light when it comes to mental health. They only care about that outcome. They don't necessarily care about the causes, right? They, for example, when someone is going through depression, they don't necessarily, or older generations don't necessarily think that their actions might have contributed to this. Rather, why is she doing like this, or why is she being depressed, or why can't she just get over it? Why can't why, or why is she acting up, or why is just, or much worse, they would even say, like, for example, oh, she's just, he or she is just uh, seeking for attention. So it's really that focus on outcome, and how,
True.
when it comes to traditional media and the romanticization of mental health, it's always been focused on outcome rather than cause. There hasn't been, for the longest time, uh, or before social media, before we knew about the importance of mental health, older folks really were, how do you call this, indoctrinized to think about mental health as something that would only happen if uh if or as something more of an effect, rather than actually, or something, or rather than questioning themselves on how, sorry, the way that they acted around mental health was more on, how do we treat it now, rather than how do we prevent the deterioration of mental health, right? And
Mm.
with this line of thinking, I'm pretty aware that I think the three of us might have also had encounters when it comes to, might have encounters when it comes to these with our older generation, with the older generation, especially with their parents. Do you also have like experiences uh, that the older folk would invalidate how you currently feel, and it would just contribute to how negative, uh, how negative your feeling was at that time?
Mm. Yeah. I have an experience about this, but it's not really about me being invalidated. It's more of it's about my our thesis work. Our thesis was a proposal of a mental health facility for people with post-traumatic stress disorder through sports psychology. And the study was done with research for a whole sem. So we knew the gravity of this illness to the people in Tacloban City. And so when we were defending our topic, what the line that struck me the most was when the panelists said, this shouldn't even be a facility. And to this day, it has made me wonder if was it really, and I admit that our thesis was its targeted users were may have been too specific, but it has made me wonder if this line of thinking is the reason why it's not getting the awareness it should be getting. So is it because the topic is being dismissed, or are we really just going at it the wrong way?
Yeah, actually, that resonated with me now when you said your professor just mentioned that this facility shouldn't exist. Well, I could say a lot of things why he would think that way. that really came into my mind was like privilege.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
because
just
the study was there, the research was there, and there were statistics we showed it was needed there at Tacloban City.
right.
And then for them to just outright say that and, disregard the fact that a lot of people really need help, it really makes you wonder if do they just did they just invalidate other people's feelings, or do they just really don't care? I don't know.
Right. Or just really highlights the things that we said like earlier, right? About like the older generation either downplaying mental health, romanticizing mental health, or much worse, just saying that oh those are just reserved for like the criminally insane or something. So
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're
and
perfect.
another thing to note was when we were proposing this one, the panelists or the coordinators were thinking like people with post-traumatic stress disorder were people who needs to go to asylum. Like what you
Uh-huh.
said, W, like they think of mental health illness as something of extremities to the extreme, and I don't know, it's really it's sad.
I don't know. I, to be I have no words. Jay, I don't know.
Yeah, it clearly
I'm kind of
shows
I'm kind of
how,
disgusted. I don't
yeah,
know.
well, we
Mm,
can't really blame this professor. It's more
yeah.
on how he was educated, or how he was brought up. Maybe when he was younger, like
Right,
you guys mentioned, maybe he's privileged, never
right,
had to work one day of his life, or had a problem one day of his life.
right,
So when he grew older, started a family, the only mental health exposure he got was from movies, books, shows
shows,
that
comedy,
glorify
like
how
men.
the, yeah, comedies, or overall he's had poor exposure to what it really means, or the gravity of going through PTSD, or going through depression, or going through anorexia, or stuff like that. So yeah, it's more on ignorance on his part.
Mm.
Right,
His comment was very ignorant, I
right.
think.
But I mean, it makes me think though, like, uh, I mean, at some point, maybe at some point in his life as well, that professor might have had uh, like a mental health issue, or at least, because at least most of us do, right? At some point,
Who doesn't, right?
right? Like have like a mental breakdown, and maybe in his experience at that time, when it comes to like his parents or maybe to his confidants, they just said like, oh, just get over it, right? That's like the well,
Yeah, that's the go-to answer.
yeah, like get over it and stuff. Like focus on moving forward. And at some point, maybe might have felt down at that point, but then maybe it stuck with him. And what's worrying about this type of thinking? Well, for me lang, and for uh, right, what's
Hmm.
worrying me about these line of thinking is it's actually like a feedback loop in a sense. Like for example, you might be having like a deteriorating mental health that you didn't know about, or but because and how you were brought up, but and because of your psyche or because of your personal beliefs, you're always thinking like, oh, I could just get over it. And then the question becomes, until when uh could
Do you
you
have to get
just get
over it?
over it, right?
Mm.
Something that we can't really dive into as much since we're not as professionals and we're talking about it's
Yeah.
like how, how does emotions or how does keeping emotions actually affect mental health um when you're aging, right? Does it how negatively does it affect. It's sad that we can't really talk about that right now since
We don't have the
we don't have the time. We're not we're also
experts.
we're not experts in the field, but if you do have listeners out there who might have an idea on how pent up emotions, or how pent up emotions, or basically being reserved affects you and your happiness long term, please do share with us, so we would all of us would be able to know and even be able to talk about, right? So yeah, Jay, do you also have like an experience similar to C's experience with her professor? Because
Well,
well, it's not a competition, but it's certainly up
yeah.
there. It's my god, it's so cringe. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
It makes me angry. Okay.
in my own personal life, I've been time and time again experiencing issues with my own mental health. And sometimes, um, like I said, when you're exposed to this and you're ignorant on how or what you're feeling, you tend to gravitate towards what you see on the internet, or what you see on social media and stuff like that. So as for me, for if let's say I experience like a negative day, or something greatly negative happened, or I'm undergoing some pressure in myself, when I was not aware of these things, or how mental health affected people, because my parents never shared anything or told me that it's okay, or let's talk about it, or stuff like that. I would, let's say, do the stuff that I can see on online, or that's the line of thinking wherein you would go or cross. And I'm lucky that now I'm more educated on what's actually happening, what kind of things that I have to do better for myself. And and the best thing is, I now have a confidant wherein I can unload my my emotions or share. So that's why I'm not really um, an advocate for resiliency, because
Mm.
on my own experience, with my struggles, I've had to resort to sharing, and maybe that person's probably had enough of how much I talk about it, or how much my outburst would affect them. But I'm very lucky that I'm able to have this person around who's always guiding me, and it's vice versa. If if they had an issue, I would try to be there as well. If they had problems, I think that social form of communication won't help. It's more on a one-on-one thing. Like, you just have to be very personal, be truthful, honest, and eventually you'll start to feel good. But that's based on my own personal experience. But there's a lot of forms of mental illnesses. There's a lot of difficulties with every person. I mean, everyone, I'm sure, experiences some pressure with their mental health in circumstances in their life, and each one has a coping mechanism. But I think in an ideal world, instead of focusing on the act or what would happen, societies, governments would be talking about why this is happening or how can we address it. Maybe a lighter work life balance, maybe some positivity, or I don't know. uh, I don't have concise ideas, but yeah, there should be some change or something to be addressed in that area to con- to assist in mental health of
Right.
people.
Thanks for sharing, Jay. Jay, I've known you since we were kids. You could always share with me
True.
when it comes to your certain issues. Uh, my door is always open. I'm always here to listen. I thank you really for sharing with us this evening your experiences, and I'm really happy that we already have a confidant that you could share uh, deepest uh, deepest and darkest thoughts. Right. Actually, I think what we could have what sadly we don't have much time, right? We could have
Yeah.
talked about how we deal personally with our mental health, or
Yeah.
how best we could actually address mental health. But sadly, that we don't have much time. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I appreciate for you sharing with us. I really hope I hope I get to hear more about your issues, of course, outside of the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
unless 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 you
As you want to air your.
everywhere.
No, I'm good.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But yeah. So thank you, Jay. I agree with you. There's a lot of things, and there needs to be a lot of communication back and forth. There, a lot of things need to be done, but when it comes to our generation, we're kind of okay already. We're about there. We already know um, how difficult dealing with having mental health issues are. We have friends who also deal with these things in a much worse state, right? But the question really now is based on our prime topic this evening, and I think Jay also started this conversation earlier. Was what would be that drastic if we were given like that drastic change to actually improve on how older generations think about mental health? What do you think it should be? Should it be should it be something that should be born out of private citizens? Say, for example, more information drives, more educational campaigns, or should it actually be supported already in legislation? Uh, whereas there are certain clauses or there are certain laws that would protect mental health, people who are afflicted with mental health issues. What are your thoughts? What if we had a drastic change? What should it be?
Hmm. Um, I saw this online in YouTube. It was the Boy Abunda's Bottom Line, wherein he interviewed mental health experts, and one of the guys there, he opened up something that he researched. It was the Black Dog Institute in Australia, I think. And then, wherein this institute was researching on things uh, that can make children be more resilient and have that grit. And they showed positive results, and they incorporated it in their education system. It started. They started it when they were young for the kids. So for me, if I were to change a drastic change, I mean, I'm all for what Jay said earlier. Resilient. He doesn't believe in resiliency. My views on it is that I think resiliency would be okay, but to force resiliency upon something would be something not okay na. So if it's something that we teach kids or people on how to deal with when being faced with certain issues or challenges in life. I think it will be something that they'll not so that when they face those challenges, they won't resort to, offing themselves or doing, um,
Referring to the internet on what
yeah, referring
they
to
would
the
do.
internet.
Yeah,
Yeah. So at least this way,
an
they would
idea.
know, yeah, they would have an idea on how to deal with it and how to better approach this certain kind of situations. So I think that would be something I want to do in the Philippines.
Right. So yeah, I agree with you, right? I mean, well, personally, on my take on resiliency, I think it should also be supplanted with like a really credible support group, and at least people teaching other people that they could confide with them, or how best to deal with someone who's going through like a mental health issue, or currently or is going through like a depressive phase and the like. Or well, for me, if I may share it, for me, I think
Mhm.
there should be a drastic change in how we educate people from from the start when it comes to like mental health. And I think um this should also be uh how do you put that, also make older generations aware of that education, right? At least there should be on the top level in the when it comes to like legislative, or when it comes to like the government, that would mention that they support any mental health initiatives, that they acknowledge that this is occurring in fact, because I think it's the only thing that's preventing the credibility of the mental health being acknowledged by our older generations, right? It's not something that's taken uh taken
Seriously.
seriously when it comes to, although there are senators in the government that support these, the majority of our government officials don't necessarily put this as something
A
as
priority.
important or as a priority when it comes to like certain laws and legislation, and it removes that credibility that the older generations would require for it to be actually treated seriously. On our end, or for example for the younger generations, I think what we can do, or what uh what I think, if I were given the chance to do a drastic change, and I just realized how this is such a Miss
Idealistic.
Universe question.
Yeah.
Thank you. But anyways, um, right. So would primarily be an education, right? How best to treat depressive episodes, how could you treat it, or how could you deal with it when you're having it in yourself. Per se, for example, always seek out a companion, or have a confidant that you could share your secrets with from the start. So at least people would be well aware on how to deal with it, right? So
Mm.
to
Exactly.
me, yeah, if I were given the chance to do a drastic change, I think it should primarily also stem from that on top, and then little by little, uh, little by little, educate younger generations to treat mental health as something as serious as your physical health. How about you, Jay? What's your take on this? If you were given a chance to do a drastic change, what would it be?
I honestly agree with both of you. I mean, we have to start from the top. The government needs to acknowledge that this is an issue. People do experience this, so it gives it that credibility with older people. It makes people from every walk of life acknowledge that or realize that this is actually a talking point and not just something that's dramatized on social media or something that's happening to the privileged or to people that are off and have other thing don't have other things to do. And then yeah, education is important. Maybe uh, when in preschool or maybe in grade school, slowly and surely the counselors in schools or teachers would be talking about this, how to cope, how to deal with it. and then how to assist people who are dealing with it, or how, because um coping and coping with a health issue by yourself is just the start of the battle, or just one part of the battle. Assisting your fellow man or your friend or your colleague in work who's dealing with it as well, or treating them with sensitivity, or acknowledging that they have something, is another part of it. It's half and half, because most mental health issues are reactions to what's happening in your environment, or reactions to what's happening to you in your life, in your workplace, in your love life, and um you reacting to it is just, or identifying that I do have an issue, I need to act accordingly, is just part of it. But other people around you would need to learn how to um, help you as well. So I think also talking about or educating our younguns, or educating us on how to assist people who are under are having these problems, is also something that we could start thinking about as well. Yeah, but aside from that, I do agree with what you've already talked about: legislation and then education. That
Mm.
those are important.
That's such a pretty nice rhyming word. Legislation, education.
Start a rap.
Legislation,
Yeah.
education, generation cap. I'm kidding. Right. I'm
Okay.
being very corny. But yeah. Thank you so much, Jay, for your opinion. I think the bottom line really here is that mental health, or addressing mental health, really requires community effort. It's not like a single, or it's not like something like a single person could just, champion and like lead and make a drastic change. It should be something that is actually something where everyone is involved. Most importantly, involve involve the generation who doesn't necessarily understand it as much as the current generation, be it because they weren't brought up that way, or the traditional media portrays it in a very negative sense. When we mean by negative, let's say for example, when we mean by negative, it's either too extreme, or it's too romanticized, or it's too dumbed down, that people immediately stereotype and don't necessarily try to understand it fully, and just focus on that outcome.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
Mm.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, but okay. So thank you, Jay. I would love to have, or I would love to know more about your opinions, or actually talk about this more. But we're running out of time. uh, Maybe we could actually continue this discussion next week.
Yeah.
Preferably, make it more personal between us when it comes to mental health.
We'll
we know
see.
that there's like an issue when it comes to like the generation gap. We've acknowledged this. We know,
Talked
we've
about it.
already presented
Yeah.
the different things that could possibly have that big change of help, or big help in also allowing them to become champions of mental health. But I think what you really missed on tonight was personally, or how we deal with it personally. What were the different things? What were the different his- or if there are issues that we're going through, what do we do? And most importantly, how do we help our friends, or if we have friends who also have these mental health issues? And I would love to have discussed that with you. But
Mm.
this could be a topic for another day, right?
Of
Yeah.
So,
course.
listeners, thank you for joining us tonight. If you have an idea, or I would actually present you the question that I presented C and J. if you were given a drastic change, what would you do to help uh, or to help educate, to help make mental health a priority when it comes to the community? So if you guys have an idea, please do tell us in the comments, or just mention it to us so we would also know and everyone would know what are your thoughts about it. C and J, do you have any final words? Do you have any other messages that you would want to share with our listeners for tonight?
Mm, I think mental health is a pretty broad topic, and mostly we were just referring to depression, I think, for tonight.
Right.
And it would be great to dive deeper into this topic and to also get some inputs from our audience or from other people, our friends, like that. And I would like to thank the listeners that we have for today who are always supportive of us.
We love you guys.
We love you.
Super.
Love is strong. How about you, Jay? Final words?
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for listening tonight, and we'd love to have you back here same time next week. And we just barely scratched the surface on this topic, and hopefully we'll have more episodes and we can talk about this deeper. And we'd love to hear from you guys as well on what you guys think.
I agree with them both. We would love to hear you guys. We would love to hear your opinions. So, as part of my final words as well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You all have been a very good crowd. Uh, we would love to have talked about mental health more. As what Jay said, we've barely scratched the surface, barely scratched the surface, and at some point we would want to dive deeper into this and talk more about it, and actually further digest and pick it apart so we would best understand it and for everyone to understand it better. Jay and C, do you agree? Okay. So,
Okay.
all right. So I'm sorry again, everyone. It's all the time that we have for tonight. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I'm W, C, and J.
Bye there, bye there.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Please listen to us, like and subscribe. Thank you again, and good night.
Good night, guys.